which was quite unlike the original. So if you just translate it directly across, he says it's bald, bland, and boring. And he had to spice it up a bit. The difficulty is there, no doubt, continuing the quote from Miss Hamilton. And yet, if we are unable to get enjoyment from a direct translation, we shall never know what Greek writing is like. For the Greek and the English ways are so different. When the Greek is dressed in English fashion, it is no longer Greek. She says to care, and then we skip a little bit, she says to care for the Greek way of writing, as well as the English way, is to be immensely the richer. So, it's fine to appreciate Shakespeare and company, but she says you'll be immensely richer if you appreciate Greek poetry. It is to have our entire conception of poetry widened and purified. Okay? Widened and purified. You may not be prepared for what's going to come here. What is she going to advocate then? How can you widen and purify over Byron and Tennyson and Keats? Plain writing is not the English genius. English poetry is the Gothic cathedral, the Renaissance portrait. You know, in the Renaissance portrait, they were proud of having every single fold of the cloth look exactly like velvet really looks, and the gold chain to look just like a gold chain did, and the pearls in the hair and everything, which is fine, and she says the Gothic cathedral's fine, take that if you please, but that's not the way for the Greeks, and the Greeks had a different way for language. Quote, "It is adorned by all that beautiful elaboration of detail can do. The words are like rich embroideries." Yeah, think of Shakespeare. Shakespeare's bristling with nonsense sometimes. Very rich and learned, and talking about and referring to and mentioning and hinting at many different things. She says, continuing, "Our poets may draw upon what they will to deck their poems. They are not held down to facts." Greek poets were. Quote, "The Greeks soar but keep their feet on the ground," said Landor. That's great, isn't it? The Greeks soar but keep their feet on the ground. Now how can you have your feet on the ground and your head in the clouds, lest you be a giant? Ah, take that home with you. Our poets leave earth far behind them, freed by what the Greeks had some small use and no name for, poetic license. The Greeks had small use and no name for it. You know, she says the English poet soars in the clouds off of earth, leaves earth. The Greek poet has his head in the clouds but his feet on the ground. Our minds are full of pictures of, quote, caverns measureless to man down to a sunless sea, of flowers so sweet the sense faints picturing them, of sermons in stone, books in the running brooks, of magic casements opening in the foam of perilous seas, of the floor of heaven thick and inlaid with patines of bright gold, still querying the young-eyed cherubims. Those are all English lines. Let's take a bit from Homer. When Homer says, "The stars about the bright moon shine clear to see," clear to the eye, clear to see, "for no wind stirs the air, and all the mountain peaks appear, and the high headlands." Got that? Let me read that again. That is like Hemingway, unadorned, absolutely unadorned. Shame that Hemingway couldn't write about something more significant than the guy next door. "The stars about the bright moon shine clear to see, for no wind stirs the air, and all the mountain peaks appear, and the high headlands." So, that's great, isn't it? Or when Sophocles describes, quote, "White Colonus, where the nightingale sings her clear note, deep in green glades ivy grown, sheltered alike from sunshine and from wind." That's a great picture. An ivory-grown glade, sheltered from sunshine and wind. Calm down in there, shady, you know? "White Colonus, where the nightingale sings her clear note, deep in green glades." Great. What's hard about that? Just read it. It's obvious. You can see it. Euripides writes, "At high tide, the sea, they say, leaves a deep pool below the rock shelf. In that clear place, where the women dip their water jars, Continue now with Edith Hamilton. The words so literal, so grave, so unemphatic, hardly arrest our attention to see the beauty in them. Our imagery would have left the Greeks as cold. Clarity and simplicity of statement, the watchwords of the thinker. Is that true? Clarity and simplicity of statement. Right? Got to be clear. State your statement in as few words as possible. Clarity and simplicity of statement were the watchwords of the Greek poet, as well as the thinker. Never to them would the humblest flower that blows have brought thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears. A primrose by the river's brim was always a simple primrose and nothing more. That a skylark was like a glowing worm, golden in a dell of dew, or like a poet hidden in the light of thought, would have been straight nonsense to them. A skylark is just a skylark. Birds were nothing else. But how beautiful a thing was a bird. And now a quote from Greek poetry. A bird that flies over the foam of the wave with careless heart, sea purple bird of spring. Makes my hair stand up. It's beautiful. It's just no nonsense to it. Let's have it again. How beautiful a thing was a bird that flies over the foam of the wave with careless heart, sea purple bird of spring. The Greeks were realists, but not as we use the word. They saw the beauty of common things and were content with it. Well, you can't get better than that. You know, there's a problem with the Bible. Okay? Let me just go on and tell you a bit about the Bible. Page 79 we are now. The influence of the English Bible has its share in making the Greek way hard for us. The language and the style of it have become to us those appropriate to religious expression, and Greek religious poetry, which makes up much of the lyrical part of the tragedies, perhaps the greatest of all Greek poetry, is completely un-Hebraic. Hebrew and Greek are poles apart. Hebrew poetry is directed to the emotions. It is designed to make the hearer feel, not think. Therefore, it is poetry based on reiteration. Now, if the Greek's poet's words simplicity and clarity, if that's what his watchwords were, then you're going to be able to read his poems and get it. You're going to be able to understand it. But if there's not anything you're trying to get the person to understand, then you needn't necessarily explain and be clear. You can just do things like what they do in the Bible. Let's have a bit here. Therefore, it is poetry based on reiteration. Everyone knows the emotional effect of the repetition produces. From the tom-tom in the African forest to the rolling sound of "Dearly beloved brethren, the Scripture moveth us to acknowledge and confess our manifold sins and wickedness, that we should not dissemble nor cloak them when we assemble and meet together, to ask those things which are requisite and necessary." Nothing is gained for the idea by these repetitions. The words are synonyms, but the beat upon the ear dulls the critical reason and opens the way to gathering emotion. The method is basic in Hebrew poetry. Now, it's not only basic in Hebrew poetry, it's basic in all religion. It's absolutely basic to religion, any serious religion, from choir chanting and singing. But let's go to the East and check out the East. Okay, you know what whirling dervishes are in Iran? That's far enough east, it's Middle East. Whirling dervishes, people that, they go to the mosques and the men take their hats off in the mosques, I think just regular Muslims, and they swing their hair up and down and they chant and yell. Now, headbanging is known to the youths, nowadays in America, as giving a bit of a rush, right? And they know that, but they're confused about it. Okay, the whirling dervishes, people that just spin and 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 spin, and scientists tell us that we get dizzy because there's a little bit of liquid in our ear that tells us which direction we're pointing, right? The vestibular sense or whatever it is. But they don't know that, These damn religious people think that they're getting in touch with some other, they're heightening their senses to some other thing, some other realm or something, the spiritual realm. And when they sing, beating the tom-toms in the forest or something, rhythmic repetition, constant and rhythmic, dulls the mind and gets you ready to just